that break really helped me reflect on a lot of things. I had a lot of time on my hands as well, between safaris or whatever. But it was that saying, okay, now, I left that organization. Nobody misses me. People miss me, but the organization doesn't miss me. So, how important was I in that scheme of things? And this is a great time to start something new and not go back to those trappings.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Second Innings podcast series. Suman, Ghosh and I are your hosts for this podcast, as usual. Purpose, passion, joy are becoming more important to us in our life journeys, especially in our work. Many of us are doing this through rediscovering ourselves by changing tracks in our lives and our careers towards what we are calling a second innings. The podcast is where we explore through conversations how some people have done these transitions and their stories. Transitioning to a second innings may require taking risks, in fact, almost always does. Telling and listening to such stories helps all of us. Today, we have a very special guest, a very special human being, and a very old and a great friend of mine, Srikanth Sarathy. Srikanth has over 20 years of leadership and organizational building experience across advertising, digital, media and entertainment, consumer engagement, and leadership development, both at Walt Disney and Leo Burnett. He has been instrumental in setting up and nurturing two startups in the consumer engagement and advertising space as well. Advocacy India being one of them. The other one, he was part of the founding leadership team at Tilt Brand Solutions. Srikanth is now an ICF certified leadership coach and a co-founder at the Core Questin. Srikanth is an avid reader, traveler, and photographer. He travels across India to experience and document some of its amazing wildernesses. I would call him my wildlife and wilderness guru. Srikanth, hi. First of all, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Atul. Hello, Suman. Thank you for having me here.
I'm gonna start, Srikanth, by asking you to just do a quick intro of yourself. Tell us a little bit about your origin years, how you kind of grew up, younger years, especially formative years, years that you could potentially look back to and see that that's how you kind of started forming the kind of person you are today and where life has led you to.
So I've lived pretty much all my life in Mumbai. I was born here in sort of the heart of Mumbai. Dadar is like as heartland Mumbai as it gets. Uh, Lovely childhood. I'm still the third of three siblings, and my older siblings are much older to me. So you could say I was spoiled, very, very, very well looked after by them and my parents, and I owe all of them a lot. I think if you had to look at one thing that characterized childhood, it was largely carefree. We never really had much, but we had more than enough. I think that was or at least I felt we had more than enough. I'm sure there were stresses that my parents and my siblings were going through that I wasn't privy to. But it was a lovely childhood. Lots of playing cricket on the roads, in Dadar. Lots of wonderful friends. Unremarkable, but a lot of fun. Same. I studied in Bombay. Schooling, college, business school, all of that was Bombay. And I think a lot of what I got was shaped by my brother, because he spent many, many years in Britannia, and that's where this whole curiosity about brands and all of that came in. He was also an avid wildlifer. In fact, and we'll talk about that, he's my wildlife guru. He was the one who really started exploring the forest as part of his travels, in Britannia, and that's where I caught the bug as well. And that sort of start, I think wildlife bug bit me a bit late. I started working in Leo Burnett straight out of campus in Bombay. Had an absolutely brilliant time. I spent 3 years in the UK, about 10, 12 years in total. Most of it was in Bombay. And then it was almost like it's time to do something different. It was like 2006, 7, and this whole digital was suddenly becoming, uh, 2.0 was suddenly becoming a conversation. And I had a friend in that space who was techie, and he said, "You guys, all your advertising people do is to put this on one slide right at the end of a presentation, along with direct marketing and all the things that you all." And I know Atul will be offended when I say that, but that was how advertising was. And he said, do you really want to do something about it? This is the time. And I just took the plunge. I wasn't sure what to expect, going to a tech company where I'd be probably the only person who has no technology background. But I just took the plunge saying, Abhi karna hai to karna hai. Otherwise, I'll always sit on this side of the fence and wish that I'd done it. And I think that's characterized a lot of the decisions I've taken, saying, if there is a time to do it, it is now. Spent a couple of years there doing a lot of interesting work. And then Disney came calling, thanks to a friend. And when something like Disney calls, you don't say no. It's an absolutely incredible place from the outside, and it's even more incredible from the inside. So had a whale of a time at Disney. And then there was a big birthday coming up for me and for my brother. My brother was 20 years older to me. So it was like, what do we do? And his dream had always been to just travel through the forest. We used to do trips together, once a year here, and a couple of days there. But it was like we just want to do something that has no end point defined at the beginning. No, let's just do it and see kya hota hai. And that's what I decided to do. I said we have to do it now because it never happens at 41. So we used the excuse of the 40th and the 60th to just stop what we were doing. And I had to exit Disney, which was one of the toughest thing I've done. And then we just traveled. We just took 7, 8 months off, and we did pockets of some incredible places all through India, and a couple of trips in Sri Lanka as well. It was probably one of the most special years that I've spent, because I never get that chance again. I lost my brother 4 years later, so it became even more special. The time that it was just us, the two of us, just doing stuff together. Of course, family would join, a few friends would join here and there, but largely it was just us, just doing stuff. And yeah, a lot of the times I think about it, saying, would I have done it today? Maybe. But at that time, it just felt like the right thing to do. And it doesn't wasn't just my decision. I think the support I had from my wife to say, just do it. Don't think about it. You'll never do it again. She just said, just do it. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. Finished that, but then wildlife never went away. I think that was really the trigger point. I was like a tourist before that, but it never went away after that. It just got stronger and stronger. Came back, and another friend reached out saying he's got this consumer engagement company, a platform that they created, word of mouth in that space. And he was doing it in China. He was an ex client at PNG, very dear friend. And he said, why don't you start something in India? And I was like, why not? And again, I just plunged into it. It seemed exciting. Just said, let's not think too much about it. It is what we make of it at the end of it. And it was 3 years of wonderful work. It didn't scale as much as I expected it would. So that's a lesson for me. But then I had some amazing people that I worked with. I had some incredible clients who put their faith in us, which was very rewarding. And happily, the people who took over from me, the people as part of my team, have made it far more successful than what I left it at. So I'm grateful for that too. So when I left, because I wasn't adding as much value as I thought I would to that place. And then it was what next, and serendipitously I met Joe at a party, believe it or not. And Joe was leading Lintas India and Southeast Asia, and he had just moved on because he'd had a milestone birthday as well. And we got talking, and he had this thought of starting something in the advertising space, which would we would dance to our own tunes, as it were. And that's how Tilt was born. So yeah, I mean, it had 2.5 wonderful years there. But then somewhere it was just about, what do I really want to do at this point, right? It was something I started thinking about. Think what gave me most joy. There was a lot of things, setting up Tilt and nurturing it, along with the other wonderful people in the team, gave me a lot of joy. But it was about, hand on heart, what did I really want to do going forward? And one of the things I realized I enjoyed most was working with other people, especially a lot of, we had some founders who would come to us, founders of very successful startups, but scaling up. And I realized the conversations I enjoyed most was where I was a sounding board, where I was a listener. And I said, that space sounds very interesting, saying, how can I help without really giving gyan. I think that was a lovely sweet spot, saying, is that possible? And my wife is an HR, and she'd done her coaching course, and that sort of space really appealed to me. And then one flashback happened when I was at Disney, and somebody I worked with, a very dear friend, he said, "Tu ek din coach banega," and he had no idea what it meant. I had no idea what it meant in 2010 or 2011. But then suddenly something started to sort of crystallize, fructify, and then again it was another plunge that I took. So yeah, that, and the rest is the core question.
which we will talk about in detail. Shrikant, I've known you for many years and we spoke earlier as well. But what's interesting is that the way you kind of recounted the story of the last 20 odd years or more than that, there's been actually several points of transition,
Yeah,
not just one, right? And at every point of transition, you've actually taken the plunge, and
yeah.
it's very interesting how at these transition points you've just kind of asked yourself not why but why not, and I mean I think that's an amazing way of looking at it. Do you see any similarities in these three or four transition points that you've kind of encountered?
I guess it was somewhere just a point to be shaken out of something that was getting comfortable, maybe. Not across all, but definitely moving out of advertising the first time around. Saying I was getting so comfortable. It was a fantastic place to be in. The Obernet was a fantastic place uh, that I spent 12 years in. And it was like, am I getting too comfortable? If I really want to do something, do I really want to be here? Do I want to scratch that itch? I think that was the thing that, if it was, I think it just the calling kept increasing in all of that. If there's a thread, it's like saying, it didn't come once. It was like this whole, the digital thing was, it landed, right? And it kept festering for a few months before I did something about it. The same thing about when I quit Disney as well. It was about saying, do I really want to do this? And the answer kept
Hmm.
saying yes. It was really hard, because to say, okay, I'm taking a break without knowing what's on the other side was easy when, sorry,
Yeah,
you're saying.
that's. I was just saying that's amazing. When you said that earlier, also that I mean, Disney. You didn't even quit Disney to for a transition. It was to actually explore. I mean, that must have been either a very easy decision or a very hard one.
It was both, actually. It really was.
Hmm.
And I don't mean it as a cliche, but it actually was both. Because, I mean, to quit Disney, and we've done some really interesting work at Disney, and just the company it is and the people that were there, it was hard. But I think I
Hmm.
just asked myself, saying, is this really what I want to do? I don't know if the need to do was always stay at Disney, but it was this really something I wanted to do? And I
Hmm.
think that answer was very clear, saying, this is never going to happen again.
Hmm.
It's not going to happen 10 years later, because then my brother would have been 70. And
Hmm.
yeah, unfortunately, he wouldn't even live to see 70. So I thank my stars. And that's also where my wife came in. I think she didn't even she didn't even say, are you nuts? She
Hmm.
just said, you want to do it, just do it. And
That
she
just
said that
underlines the importance of support.
100%. It's
Hmm.
impossible to do it without support. It is
So I'm
absolutely
finding
impossible.
it quite intriguing, actually. That's the word, You were in Disney, and I often talk about this push and pull factor. There was no push. You said the journey was incredible, and but you left, and you basically, went on this journey with your brother. But when you actually left Disney, did you kind of know by that time as to what you're going to do next?
No, absolutely no idea. That was also one thing which, in a way, it was like, if I'd known, then I would have started acting on it sooner than I was ready to do it. So
Hmm.
it was, let's
Hmm.
see what comes up. And sometimes it was frightening to say, what if nothing comes up? But then one of
Yeah,
my
so how did you do it? I mean, I'm just kind
I
of
don't
finding that
know.
very difficult to.
I
So
don't
what
know.
was your
Fascinating.
pull factor? Okay, one of the things was, I think, uh, the milestone birthdays, as you call them, right? So those are, obviously, it seems like you're a very reflective type. You'd asked yourself all of these questions, and so that was one.
Mm.
Uh, and I'm just thinking, a lot of us don't do that, right? We tend to procrastinate.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you always live by this thing that if it has to be done, it has to be done now, which is very powerful. And in hindsight, because you did it then, you had this thing with your brother, because he was there only for 4 years after that, isn't it? But let's if you can talk a bit more about that transition. Of course, we'll talk about the other three or four after that.
So use the word procrastination, right? And I think that's also a part of me, which is putting things away. But I also have parallelly living with this procrastinator specialist that I had become, that I have, I still am. I also learned to read that this was something I really wanted to do. And it is almost overcoming the procrastination rather than anything else to say, it was about the opportunity to say, is this a great opportunity or not? Will it come 6 months later? Will it come a year later? Will it come 2 years later? Probably not. And almost most definitely not. I think that was the trigger. And it wasn't a last minute thing. It wasn't like I said, I'm leaving in 2 months. It was actually planned out about over 6 months. So 6 months before I was going to leave, I'd actually had the conversation internally in the company. So it had time to set that up. And also this travel, right, was really precious, the time. So that was also
Mm.
planned carefully so that we weren't just hurtling from one place to another, because that's, given how crazy wildlife safaris are in India, would have been
Yeah.
impossible to do. We were going to
Mm.
places that I'd only read about in books. So that required planning, and that was so much fun. Like planning with my brother, rapping about where to go. Should we go here? Should we go there? We don't even know what kind of places there are going to be. So that actually, it was that calling. It just became at one point not unbearable, but it was became very difficult to ignore. And the milestone birthday was actually probably the hook that allowed me to justify to myself. I didn't have to justify to anybody else, because of
Yeah.
how supportive my wife was, and the fact that my brother was co-opted onto this journey. I had to justify it to myself. And there were scary moments saying, what am I doing? I'm letting go of, a great job at Disney. What if I don't get anything back again? And then that's where one of my mentors, the person who hired me at Leo Burnett, so I had lunch with him one day, and I said, boss, what if I don't get a job? He said, तेरे को कितना नौकरी चाहिए? I said, एक चाहिए. He said, एक मिल जाएगा. 100 चाहिए तो मुश्किल है. And till date, I remember that. It's incredible advice. His
Wow.
ability to distill such a complex, so many dimension conversation into one line, saying, "Kitna naukri chahiye?" I still use that. I still use that
And that
with
is
many
so
people.
true.
But I'm still thinking there are two parts to it, right? One is, hey, I want to take this vacation, right? I want to spend time, and I'm 40. I can still take a 6 month sabbatical and do that and come back. But it's something else to say, I want to leave this and do something completely different. I think, and one is a little more long term, isn't it?
Was that even
So,
an option, Shrikant, that you could have left Disney and come back after 6 months?
I didn't even explore it because I think, see,
Acha.
that thing of it had to not have an end point. Both of us didn't want to have an end point before we started. So
very
that was
interesting.
the factor in this, to say if it has an endpoint before we start, then it doesn't become what we really dreamt of. Then it becomes a exactly what you said. It's a fixed time break. We
That is
wanted it to
amazing.
be freewheeling, more freewheeling than that, and that's actually what happened. So we planned, a couple of things here and a couple of things there, and later in the year, so the monsoon came in between. Obviously, later in the year, we said, "Oh, let's do this," and my brother took me to Sri Lanka for my 40th. That was his gift to me. It wasn't even on the original agenda, but he made it happen. So I planned the
Mm.
rest of it, and then we did Assam and the Northeast. So a lot of it also evolved, while some of it was planned. And if we just had that 6 month thing, half of this would have gotten
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
constricted. It would have felt a little more constricted, probably more logical to do that. So I didn't even explore that option. I also think it's not fair to an organization to say, मैं जा रहा हूँ अभी 6 महीने बाद आता हूँ, please give me something. I don't, it doesn't sit with me. Even if it was an option, it just didn't sit with me. Didn't
Sure.
even occur to me though.
The other thing which I found very fascinating, Srikant, you mentioned that, am I getting too comfortable, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're a leadership coach. We talk about this, getting out of our comfort zones. You know, that quote that, are you comfortable by
Mm.
being uncomfortable?
Mm.
Uh, but the fact that you are using this to reflect and make decisions, was it always there in you, or was it a realization at some point saying, hey, maybe I'm getting too comfortable and I should step out and do something totally different?
See, that happened certainly at Burnett when the first time I moved into the digital company. Because there I was getting very comfortable. I'd spent 12 years in advertising, and it was going fine, going great, and I loved the place. I've been part of it for forever almost. Love the people. That point was like, okay, am I getting comfortable in this? Am I really growing beyond how the company is growing me? Am I going to pay lip service to digital? So that trigger, yes. I don't think it's come to me later, because I never let myself get comfortable. After that, everything was about, and for different reasons, kept moving a few years here and a few years there. But that one certainly was.
Let me ask you, let me just try and ask you, connect you with when you were really young, like in your teens or even before that, and growing up years. Can you make any connections with the way you were then to being a person who was comfortable with making these transitions, or make connections with being a coach, for example?
I had no clue what I was as a teenager. In fact, I had no clue what I wanted to do as a teenager. I think it was just having fun. So actually, that you mentioned, there's an interesting one, right? When I was in school, engineering karne ka hai ya medical karne ka, was always that what to
Yeah.
do after grade 10. It depended on how much you got, what kind of marks you got also. And I started off, I did reasonably well in my 10th. I went to a science college in Bombay at that time, and it was always engineering. But then I think probably in a month, I realized that's not for me. I don't want to. When I saw some of the guys in my class and how hard they would work with their IIT JEE papers, and I was like, boss, this I'm just started my 11th. These guys have already been studying for 3 months. I was like, that's not for me. I don't think that is my. So I remember coming to my brother and saying, I don't want to do engineering. He said, Mat kar. No conversation, discussion saying, oh my God, what, you're wasting an opportunity, nothing. He said, nahi karna hai, mat kar. And he
Hmm.
said, kya karna hai? I said, I don't know. He said, okay, you'll figure
Hmm.
it out. And then somewhere did my undergrad did my undergrad BSc, which was going to lead nowhere if I didn't do a postgrad. Somewhere towards the end of it, a business school seemed like a logical next step. Did that. Took a punt on a new business school in Bombay. Took a punt. Didn't know what I wanted to do. At the end of it, didn't definitely knew I didn't want to do finance. I wanted to do marketing. Then advertising became one source of interest, because there were other guys who were really keen on it, who were far more creative than I were. And Leo Burnett happened.
Yeah, I think there is definitely, and taking a punt, in another way to put it, might be the approach of why not? Let's just give this a go. Why not?
Yeah.
And that has a very interesting ring to it, as Suman and I have discussed on earlier episodes as well. That is just a great approach to doing things in life. All
Where
credit
do
to
you
you
all
for
stand
having
on
done
that?
that.
I'm very curious to know, where do you all stand? What is your.
Shrikant, I've never really thought of it as taking a punt, and I don't think I've ever articulated this, but my instinct is to be very calculated in my approach to things, right? It's a very funny thing to say, instinct is to think about things, but
Yeah.
I sit down and look at pros and cons, cost benefit analysis, and all of that. But I have found that there are times when I go with my gut, um, because eventually, even after you've done all your calculations, if you're trying to figure out something for the future, it's extremely unlikely you'll find an answer in logic, right? You are going to have to take a gut call at some point and say that, it's great, you've got some information, but go for it, at some point. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I've done it several times in my life, and my experience has been that if I go wrong when my gut has told me to do it,
Hmm.
I'm comfortable with the outcome, even if things go wrong, because that's something that I felt like doing. It's when I overthink it and things go
Mm.
wrong, that I tend to be far more harsh on myself. That, you thought about it, you figured it out, you thought you had the answer, and then it went wrong. Boss, this is not happening. You really should have thought harder. It's a bit like that. So I enjoy the gut calls much more, and do it. But, and having said that, we're in a very privileged position to be able to talk about these gut calls and things like that,
Yeah.
right? Many people don't even have the option of doing
Yeah.
that.
No, and I've hugely admired you for starting Candid out of campus. I mean, and coming out of a business school like that, and when everybody was taking these, fat jobs with wow companies, to say I'm going to start Candid. I mean, I've always taken my hat off to you.
Yeah, it was that was, I mean, I would say, looking back now, it was the ultimate gut call, in that sense, at a very young age. And part of it was brave, but part of it was also sheer stupidity of youth, that you don't know what you're putting at stake. You Looking back, you can now see what the stakes were, but I don't think I realized the stakes at that point. But that brings me to another thing related to this, which is, when I look back, and I've taken many decisions as part of Candid also for many years, I can remember the ones that I didn't take
Mm.
more than the ones that I did take and went wrong. I have no problems with the ones I took and went wrong. Excellent. I tried it, though there were outcomes of that and losses and time lost, etc. But the ones that I didn't take, and I'll take an example related to the one that you just spoke about, Srikanth, which is, that time when digital was kind of coming through,
Mm.
2007-8, when you took the punt on the digital bit. It was actually exactly 2008, and looking back, I remember it because in 2008 I was invited to be on the jury of the Cannes Lions, in the activation and events part of Cannes Lions. And I went there and I found that the world was now bringing together digital with communication and integrating it. They weren't seeing it separate. India was still seeing it a little separate, but in the West, they were really integrating it really well. And I came back to India, and my immediate gut reaction was, let's start a digital and social media marketing agency separately, right?
Mm.
And I didn't do it. Right, I decided to do it as a part of Candid, except Candid was India's number one activation agency, was always going to focus on activation, was never going to give the time of day. Clients wouldn't give us the time of day on in digital social media. And imagine if I had started a social media marketing agency in 2008,
Yeah.
right? So that's the turn that we didn't take at that point, or an additional thing. So you remember these rather than the one you took and that didn't work for you. So
That's
that gut thing is very often about what you don't do as well, sometimes.
yeah, so true.
So when Atul and I graduated, and our lives were very, very different. In fact, when we recently started talking and collaborating, uh, he said, our lives couldn't have been more different.
Mm.
He had started out something on his own. I was in a cushy corporate job, did that for the longest time, procrastinated, didn't want to get out of my comfort zone, huge fear of failure, right? So eventually I took and in fact, I'd spoken about this in a previous episode, saying that at some point this fear of failure got overtaken by the fear of regret, saying, shit, shouldn't happen that I retire and then said, should have done something, right? So similar to and a lot of the reflection came later after I had started out. And that's another interesting thing. Either people don't take the plunge, or if they do, they're not in their second innings, they're in their fourth and fifth innings. And that's we've seen across so many people.
Mm.
You just get better at taking these risks.
That is true for
That's
sure. Yeah.
so true.
It always it's the f- each time you take a risk, you become less wary of taking a risk. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but that really kind of turns out quite interestingly over a period of time.
And again, we have to define what risk is. Remember Somel, what he said? He said, I'm not fundamentally a
Yeah.
risk taker, I'm a fun seeker.
Yeah.
It's
Risk.
how you're framing it in your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, so he was talking about, yeah, Shrikant, that I'm a fun seeker. I'm not a risk taker, and it just so
Mm.
happens that when I seek fun is mostly on the edges of what you do, and as a result, there's a certain amount of risk attached to that. But the fun is what I'm after.
And that's so true. I mean, I'm totally risk averse. I'm not a risk
Uh,
taker.
It doesn't sound like it from some of the stories you've been telling us.
That's like you said, right? About what Showman was that? Was that who?
Sawmill, yeah, sawmill.
Yeah, Samuel. Yeah, I don't think anything I've taken. It looks like a risk from the outside. I didn't think I was taking a risk.
Hmm.
So a
So
lot of
since we're
people.
talking of risk, why don't we talk about a little bit of the financial aspect? Since you're not a risk taker, when you
Mm,
decided to leave for the first time the corporate world,
mm.
how did you go about planning your finances?
I think we put enough away. While to say, okay, now this is going to be a year-long break. If even if it is a year-long break with the travel and with the running the house, my wife had just gone back to working at that time. So it was. I think that's where her support was invaluable. She was. I mean, after our daughter was born, she was working part-time for a few years, and then she had just gone back to full-time. So we had said that we have enough of a runway for, yeah, enough of a runway. Did we have enough to retire at that point? No. So it wasn't sitting on a nest egg. It was comfort with the runway that existed. And there was
Hmm.
also some, I guess, foolish confidence of कुछ तो अच्छा हो ही जाएगा.
No, I think that nest egg versus runway is a very important distinction.
Mm.
Am I saying, hey, am I good for 2 years? Because that gives me a lot more, resilience and a willingness to do something, as opposed to saying, do I have a nest egg? Can I retire? Because by that you could just delay the process.
Yeah, and that's like a always moving goalpost, especially
Yeah,
for me.
that is true.
What is enough to
Hmm.
retire? And
Hmm.
my advocacy actually found my co-founder, my founder. He actually said that it is also about saying this is how much I have. Can I live well within what I have? That is the time when the trigger happens on do I have enough? Otherwise, there's no enough
Yeah.
because if our wants keep expanding. But to say this is how much I have, can I be comfortable? And you define what comfort is. Can I manage to live comfortably within what I have? And that's a great answer to the nest egg conundrum that I've learned.
There are
Yeah,
two
and that
things
links
in.
to your spouse being supportive, because
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
supportive not just in terms of saying go ahead and do what you have to do, but also being comfortable staying in the way you have defined your lifestyle, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and
And there
I,
are two things
that's
there.
why.
One is Shrikant. Two things you mentioned. One is, of course, what you said about uh, enough of a runway versus the nest egg. I think that's got a very strong connection, and we've seen this with, I think, 6, 7 of our podcast guests, that is a certain level of lifestyle that you need to maintain, right? What we found is that a lot of people who do make this transition are not really worried about getting onto a very, very lofty lifestyle, if I can call it that. And that in itself is a very good reason to be able to make the transition. And the second is something you just said a couple of minutes back, which was that kuch to acha ho hi jayega. Now,
Hmm.
that kind of a positive attitude, within there, somewhere there is also gratitude, because abhi tak, good has happened and we are happy with the way life has kind of dealt their cards to each of us. Is that, yes, it will happen again. And that's something again that a lot of people have said to us, that always belief was that I'll take the jump, and I have the gratitude and the belief that something good will come my way. And that makes it easier. That kind of belief system, value system, kind of tends to give you a certain amount of confidence.
So undoubtedly, I think it's that is what you said really hit. It's also I think you said about this kind of lifestyle we aspire for. Also somewhere um, the corporate ladder and what I was expecting out of it. I think very early on I stopped respecting designations to say I want to become X, I want to become Y, because I realized a lot of it was not meaningful to me. That
Hmm.
also made it easier to say okay, I have to climb these rungs in this way. And support, I think, even with the coaching plunge that I took, if it wasn't for my wife, it would have never happened. So that support is invaluable. I mean, I owe her a lot. If I'm living what I really want to live, it is thanks
Hmm.
to her.
You just mentioned the corporate ladder, and sometimes we use these metaphors quite often.
Mm.
And somewhere I was reading this saying, in our mind, the corporate ladder gives it one dimension. You just have to go up. Why not reframe that and think of maybe rock climbing, where sometimes you don't go up, you deliberately go sideways,
Yeah.
because it puts you in a better position. And I thought that was very powerful. So, are you looking at it
Hmm.
linearly, or are you looking at what gives you joy, and what are the things you need to do?
Yeah, it's what am
You
I
know,
doing this for? I think it was a
yes. Hmm.
that's a it's also a question I use a lot, saying what are you doing this for?
Yeah.
My coaching work. So what ultimately do you want out of this?
Hmm.
We talked a little earlier when we were talking, Shrikant, we talked about this, and that's related to this why and purpose and passion. We talked a little earlier about how your the whole interest in wildlife safaris, now birding, is something that's very close to your heart and something you enjoy doing, and which I can only imagine really makes life worth it, right? In that sense. Um, we were talking earlier about how is it that for people who make this kind of a transition into work that is self defined to some extent, does these interest areas, do they come into it as an outcome of the fact that you have more time on your hands, or is it because you wanted to do these things that you figured that I need to be able to define my work better so that I have time to do these things in my life?
Mm, I think for all of this, and again, it's a cliche. You have to make time. You have to make time.
Hmm.
I think having time and making time, there are overlaps, but they're actually two very different things. If you have time and the question is, what do I do with this time? And here's a passion that comes up, then I guess it's a different kind of engagement with that. But if it is, this is something that's really close to my heart or defines who I am, then the time gets made for that no matter what. And if it means that other things are coming in the way of that, then sometimes the other things also start getting questioned, saying, what is this giving me? And I respect that. I've had the luxury of doing that. I know that it's a luxury for a lot of people,
Hmm.
and I really respect that. But I can only speak for myself. I think it was always, for the longest time, wildlife was okay. Let's do once a year when we have the time, long weekend here and a weekend there, and maybe a few days the annual vacation. I've also missed wildlife trips because I had work. So, but at one point it was like, this really is giving me a lot more than just the gratification of seeing that animal or that bird there.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
become far more a part of me. So that became a lot more difficult to ignore. And did subconsciously my choices define, or did I define my choices in a way or allow myself that time? Maybe, but not always. In
Hmm. Hmm.
Not
But it's
always.
also about prioritization. And while I think you're being a little kind to other people by saying that you had the privilege of of having done it. But the reality is that a lot of people prioritize, and I'll say the M word, prioritize money over these things. Yeah, through your 30s and your 40s, you just say, I need to make more money, more money, more money, more money, more money, and reach a point where you don't know how much is enough money, and you're
Yeah.
giving up on what you enjoy. Which, I mean, so wildlife is one example, playing football could be another, doing something else could be another. But I think you prioritize these things in what I would say is the right way. And that, I think, is credit to you, because a lot of people don't do it. A lot of people are in the rat race and just continue running in that direction, as opposed to doing what they really truly enjoy, and realize too late in life that time has gone by.
And fair enough. I mean, you have a point there. But I think you also need to be allowed to do that. And I was allowed. And that's where support is also super important. And I keep
Yeah,
going
yeah.
back to that, maybe like a stuck record. But I mean, it's a very important part of that record.
No, no,
That
sure,
if
for
that
definite.
support hadn't happened, then see, money is important. It is, right? We're not even debating that. I think when it ceases to become the burning priority from a need point of view, to say, okay, we're okay. And it's about also feeling that, right, to say we'll be fine. And I think that is not, that cannot be unilateral. That has to have that support of whoever are the interested people in one's life. I mean, in my case, my wife probably had to pick up a lot of the slack for when I was not working. Or and I think her willingness to push me, not willingness, I think she actively pushes me still to say do it. That's not easy. That doesn't come to everyone, and that's why I think it's a privilege.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. I
yeah.
think most of the conversation, many of the conversations we've had have been ones where the family support has been strong, whether it was the husband or the wife or significant other person. But I think what I hear you saying is, and a lot of the credit does go to Surbi in terms of active support, not just
Yeah.
passive. I'm there
Yep.
kind of support, and that's to her credit, for
I
sure.
think
I was going to ask you, Shrikant, to kind of look back and try and pick through the bones to see, is there a is there a sense of a particular passion or purpose that you can see that you have been seeking through multiple things that you're doing?
so. I think it's the purpose and the calling, if you want to call it, is. And I realize now that to this space that I'm in, this whole coaching, leadership development, facilitation, really is my calling. It was probably subconscious earlier. I probably had no realization of it. And even that trigger conversation with my friend in Disney saying the coach banega, it was probably prophetic in that sense, because it really didn't come even when I signed up to become a coach. I was very interested in it. I was really interested in it as a discipline to see what can happen for many reasons, right? So also the flexibility now, not bound by anything. I can do my own thing, build it my way, etc., etc. But it's when I was doing the coaching course, and it was such a wonderful course. And as part of that, we did our own self discovery as well. So to understand ourselves, because that's part of what we do when we start coaching somebody now. It's self discovery is the first step. And there, in a way, that purpose statement that I wrote for myself, very subconsciously, in a way, just underlined almost what really this thing meant to me. The whole sense of helping
Hmm.
people, supporting, connecting people with, what drives them, helping people uncover what really they want to do in their own purpose, was actually my purpose. And that was almost like a light bulb. I approached that session like a typical advertising cynic, ठीक है इसमें क्या होगा, but then at the end of it, I was quite blown. And I hold that very, very dear. And that's actually helped me cement through this journey as a coach, as a partner at the Core Question, because it's not easy. It's not easy to strike out as a coach today. There are many coaches. There are, and but it's still hard to set up a sustainable practice, to keep doing the things we want to do. Uh, so that purpose actually helps sustain, because we also started it at a time when COVID happened. I mean, we started it and the second wave pretty much took over, and that the whole world was in a dizzy. So I think, so that as well, during this time, the almost like the, not confidence, but the realization that this is really where I want to be, helped tide over some of that, some of the
Yeah,
uncertainty, saying where is this going to go.
sure.
And that's why that whole purpose and understanding why is very important. The what and the who, right? I think we're always so focused, and that's what Peter and Amrita, who were our mentors and our coaches in our coaching journey, I said it, we're always so focused on the what about the how do we
Hmm.
bring the who a little bit more into our lives. And I think helping that who for myself really has really worked, because this is satiating the who a lot, the work that we do now. And again, I mean, the best part about this is I'm not doing this alone. I've rarely enjoyed doing anything on my own. I don't bird on my own. I don't do wildlife trips on my own. I mean, it's the sense of I draw my energy from people around. So, having three wonderful partners, that's a source of inspiration as well. It's a source of support, inspiration, ideas. And I think happened to board this bus because it was actually it was not my idea to form a company. It was Shweta Anand Arora, who is a very dear friend, and just to give you a sense on how this thing happened, if that.
Yeah, please do. In fact, I was going to ask you about, how important has it been in this journey to have the partners along? Because as a
Absolutely.
transition, very often when people are trying to, do this kind of thing, they do it with alone or with partners. So please go ahead, tell us a little bit about that journey.
So when I decided to become a coach, I just took the plunge. I moved on from tilt, decided to become a coach. And as I was signing up for the coaching course, I realized that a very dear friend, she'd already done a coaching course, and your coaches usually plow lonely furrows. A lot of them, they're entrepreneurs themselves and do their own coaching practices. But her vision was to create something that was bigger than a set of individuals or her own self, and that's where she created the Core Question.
Right.
And it just happened that three more of us were in the same coaching cohort and all connected to her. And yeah, Ramit, who's her husband, and Mandira, who's a dear friend. So, and the Core Question, actually, thanks to Shweta's vision, became four of us, and far bigger than the four of us rather than a coach or a set of coaches. I think that's huge, because it's not just I'm now trying to coach five people, but it is what are we building together in this space.
Hmm.
So that sense of, it's not just support, it's also the direction that was provided. Like I said, I jumped onto this bus. The bus was built by somebody else's vision. I'm very grateful for that. And doing it together means we get better, we push each other, we learn from each other. There are times when each of us is going through ups and downs in terms of what's going on with us. And I think it's that ability to lean on each other to say, okay, this will pass. If something's not going as well as it should have, somebody else will pick up the slack, or
Hmm.
we'll all learn together if there's a particularly tough time, as there have been. I mean, the last 4 years or 3.5 years since have hardly been predictable, right? It's the world is becoming more and more complex
Yeah.
with every few months. So having partners, having allies, having shoulders of support is incredibly useful in these journeys.
Hmm.
Actually, I've been lucky in every stage to have somebody to turn to. I don't think I could have done anything on my own. Like, I couldn't have done what you did, Atul, which is, start a company and then have people on board.
Hmm.
Um, so in that sense, that's why maybe I don't call it risk taking, because there's the risk, the pot of risk is the same, but there are four people to help mitigate it.
It's Srikanth. So if you had to look back at your journey and you had to redo it again, do the whole thing all over again, what would you do differently and what would you do the same?
Just thinking back, if I'd got another chance to do this, I probably wouldn't have done it. I think it's some of it sounds foolhardy at times.
But I'm curious why you say that.
I'm now putting on probably a different hat, uh, and no, I would have done a lot of it. I would have done the same, because I think every single thing that I've done has added to me. Whether I've added to it or not, I don't know, but has added back to me. Um, would I have? I think I would have probably become a birder slightly earlier. I would have maybe become a coach slightly earlier. Maybe those are the two things, because that again, that coaching itch was there, and I flirted with it for a while. But again, things happen when they're meant to happen. Maybe had I flirted with it earlier, I would have abandoned it because I wouldn't have found the partners I did, and I would have gone back into
Yeah.
corporate.
Yeah. I
So
think the timing is crucial.
yeah, I think everything happens when it's meant to happen. There is, I mean, there is this. there is this incredible serendipity. It's not just about the decision that I took, it's finding the right teachers, it is finding the right partners, it is the right timing of some of this. Maybe advocacy was the right thing at the wrong time, maybe. Sometimes I realize that. So it is, I think everything that's happened has in some way worked itself out. Maybe the one thing I'd have done different is maybe ask my wife if she wanted to indulge in anything and given her that space. Maybe I would do that. I do that now, but I don't know. She needs to figure her space out. But
Yeah.
maybe earlier on, that would have been something I would have more actively sought out. And maybe some things would have changed. But eventually, I think we all end up where, and this I'm saying again, it's a luxury because a lot of people don't have the choice. So that respecting that luxury, respecting that freedom of choice is something that I would have done irrespective.
But sometimes they say that you always have a choice.
Absolutely. But there are some base level things that we can't do without. And if we have to live in today's times, there are responsibilities that we can't overlook, even if we think that they are not as pressing as maybe our previous generations did, or the resources we have by default are better than what our previous generation did. But there is still a base level that we need to get to. There is still a life, and there are people who say, I really don't care what I do now. This is my passion. It doesn't matter if I live in a one bedroom house for the rest of my life. I'm doing something that gives me absolute realization of my purpose. I don't think I'm there yet. I couldn't do that. The trappings of life for myself and the immediate family is important.
Yeah, but the thing is, Shrikant, that the interesting bit here is it's a question of which level you prioritize at, right? You've reached a certain level in terms of financial resources, and you've parallel to that prioritized what you want to do, your freedom, your enjoyment, whatever. A lot of people don't do that. They go to a
Right.
financial resources level which is 10 times greater than they need. Forget about our definitions, but 10 times greater than they themselves would need in one lifetime before getting around to doing what they enjoy. I mean, to me, it just beggars belief and it defies logic. And some of them are people that I know well or are friends. And you just
Mhm.
wonder, where does it make sense to do it like that? So it's
And
just a
I feel
question. It's
sometimes we are justifying that because you're justifying what you're doing based on money, based on the financials. And it's not that you're doing a compromise. Okay, I'm getting good money in corporate. You can start off something on your own, but why are we assuming that's not going to do well? Maybe it will take some time, and eventually you might do far better in that monetarily than even what you were doing in
absolutely.
corporate.
I think it's a mindset issue more than prioritization as well. Absolutely. Yeah.
And Atul, about your point of making a lot of money, it's very interesting. And somewhere I read that for those people, the money becomes their identity.
Sure.
They
Mm,
don't feel good if they're not, because their idea of their self worth comes from the money they're earning. So
mm,
after that, after a point, it's not about the actual amount of money. It's basically keeping their self worth, which I
mm,
thought was a very interesting spin.
Yeah.
mm,
No, it is fascinating. And it's also why a lot of people who need that sounding board are in our 40s or early 50s, because we've let work define our identity for 2 decades and there's no judgment on that. And that's the way it's been. And I think the void actually starts happening when we're at that level, what you were talking about, Shuman, that I'm at that level, making enough money, have put a nest egg away, have a home, now have a family, have that, children are at a, so now what about me, what next? And that what
Mm.
next is a conversation which goes in many places. It's what do I want to do, what do I have to do, what do I need to continue to do, what should I stop doing? But that then becomes the trigger for a lot of the times. It is, oh, but I've always wanted to do this, but I've never had the, people use the guts to do it, or I've never
yeah.
been able to abandon what I'm doing. So the question to us is,
Mm,
what you know what makes abandoning a necessity, which is
I
where this.
couldn't do it because I never had the support to do it. Because again, you're blaming it on somebody else. You had in our previous conversation when we were chatting, you mentioned that my identity initially when you were working, your work was your identity.
Yeah.
If that be so, then how come you made all these changes? So what made you change that identity? How were you able to get out of
It's also it was also a greater calling that came. It was, and that helped the whole wildlife, and that calling helped me reevaluate it. While wildlife is a passion and not my purpose, but seeing that I wanted that more at that point suddenly made me step back from all the trappings that a work career or being in a large company provided. And those are very good trappings. Like working in a large organization means there's a lot of things that come with it. But that break really helped me reflect on a lot of things. I had a lot of time on my hands as well, between safaris or whatever. But it was that saying, okay, now, okay, I left that organization. Nobody misses me. People miss me, but the organization doesn't miss me. So, how important was I in that scheme of things? And this is a great time to start something new and not go back to those trappings.
So you said that it was your passion, not your purpose. So in your head, how do you separate the two, passion and purpose?
So, see, passion is something I can indulge in. Purpose is something that drives me, and sometimes they can meet.
Hmm.
But they may not also,
They may
right?
not. They may not.
Like a
Yeah.
hobby can be a passion, but it may not be a purpose, right?
Absolutely.
You were
Wildlife is.
mentioning to us Yeah, you were mentioning to us earlier that, it could have been that you could have been a photographer, but you realize that, that's not necessarily something there maybe the two could have connected, if it could have been, but you found that they weren't really having the overlap, and you decided to let that be a passion and find a different purpose. I think that's a very interesting, kind of insight and distinction to make, because very often people are trying to find a passion and a purpose overlap, and if
Yeah,
they don't, then they feel that it's not possible to do it now, and give up on both to some
yeah,
extent.
yeah. No,
And
maybe.
we often use these words interchangeably, Atul. That's why I
Yeah.
wanted to have that separation. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also perspective, right? It is, what role does that play? A lot of the times you can actually fulfill your purpose through your passion too. If there is an intersection, if there's a healthy enough intersection, right? If my journey is to support people and I can do it by writing, or I can do it by photography, which are my, or wildlife, which are my passions, then so be it. If not, then they both have very discrete roles to play in my life, but it doesn't have to be. It's a, what you love versus what you're good at, and if they both intersect, it's fantastic. And if they also give you purpose in terms of, then it's even better. But they all have discrete roles to play in life. And I'm being very philosophical now.
You've earned the right to be philosophical.
Well, I think it's a very interesting conversation, and it's important to distill these things. To be very clear. Uh, I read somewhere they said nowadays you hear of us people having working in the gig economy and doing a side hustle, but you don't hear the word hobby, because in a hobby it's a passion with no end goal in mind,
Hmm.
whereas in hustle you're trying to make some money out of it.
Hmm.
So I thought that was very interesting. We need to have hobbies because you don't know, you have to discover what you enjoy, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and if photography was a profession, or even,
Hmm.
then I may have gone about it very differently. And then there's success failure attached to it, right? Are you a successful photographer or not? Now there's no, wildlife doesn't have an outcome. It doesn't have a consequence for me.
Very interesting point. You make a purpose out of a passion, and it might even spoil the passion. You stop enjoying it because it in terms of the outcome, it's not getting to where you want it to get to, and you suddenly start feeling, "Yaar, ye to maza hi nahi aaya. This is ridiculous. This is not fun. Let me stop it." So
Or I'm not good enough.
yeah, I'm not good
That's
enough.
a,
That's true.
yeah.
So
You
true.
don't need to be good enough to go on a safari, right? Or watch or see a bird. You need to be good enough to spot a bird or take a photograph, which I realized that, I mean, I have limitations in. But there is no end outcome that adds back to something I'm trying to accomplish.
The joy is in the journey itself. One doesn't have to worry about outcomes at all.
Yeah, in a passion, absolutely. So it is because there's no end point in that. Passions
Mm.
also make I mean, they make me greedy. It is, I want to see this and that and go here and see that. And so it's great greed. But I'm not trying to prove anything to anybody.
Since you were saying you are getting philosophical, it's the right time to ask you. So, what advice would you have for somebody who wants to start out something, pivot, or whatever, do something on their own?
It's a tough. I think, I just think that deep down, if you really want to do it or not. I think that what Atul was saying a little while ago, which is just listen to that voice. And if being evaluative means, I mean, we're all built differently, but I think I subscribe to what Atul was saying, that the more we evaluate something, the more we find reasons not to do it. I mean, everything is imperfect. Everything is
That
imperfect.
overthinking bit.
Yeah, I mean, if we're not built as analytical thinkers, I'm not an analytical thinker. That is not what comes naturally to me. So if I do it, then I end up overdoing it, and I put on a lens which is trained to find issues with the direction, with the model, with saying this is not going to go well, because there are 100 reasons why anything cannot go well. But if that voice is saying just do it, and you've got that support, and you've got the support that you're seeking, whatever it is. I mean, we all have and want different kinds of support. So long as there's a base, that your bases are covered, so long as there's a source of support, then just listen to that voice. Because again, I mean, I'm just going back to something Atul was saying. It's, we remember the things that we didn't do because of what could have been, and we're more forgiving about the things that we did which didn't go as well, because we must have tried our best, or we realize now that we didn't try our best. Yeah, तो ठीक है, अभी नहीं हुआ तो नहीं हुआ. But what if I had was a is a question that will afflict us a lot in our 50s and late 40s or whatever. So the earlier we think about it, the better it is. And which is why I love some of the young people that I meet and talk to. There's that incredible confidence of this will happen, and it is, that's what it needs to be. I mean, so just listen to the voice. I mean, that would be the only thing I would say. And if it's something where you're going on a limb, just evaluate the limb a little bit to say, can I survive on that limb? Can I flourish on the limb is maybe beyond us to predict right now, but can I survive on the limb, so that if I need to come back to what is familiar, I'm able to. So it's
That's
just
good
just do it.
advice. That's very good advice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that, that inner voice you have to listen to, but this same inner voice which is aching you, nudging you to do something, is also the same inner voice which is being protective, telling you, hey, you know, be careful, don't do this. And that's what leads to overthinking as well. So I think we have to also figure out which part of the inner voice should we really focus on, isn't it?
Yeah,
The
maybe
regret about the, like they say, the regret about the past, and the anxiety about the future, but you're never in the present.
maybe they're two different voices. Maybe they
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
maybe they're like a seesaw counter, which is when one comes in, the other naturally has to counterbalance. And to actually look to, sometimes it, and I think life always gives you that outlet to find the right one. Which one is the real you and which one is the counterbalance? That's the story, right? That's what helps you decide which way to go. But I think we get
That's a
enough
great way to
indication,
put it.
sometimes don't want to listen to it. And when we find ourselves saying, am I doing this because I don't feel up to it, or is one side of me saying that is the right thing to do, but don't do it?
And Suman, that's where what you and I were talking, I think it was last week or the week before, about that why not. What is your starting point?
Exactly.
We were talking about this, Srikanth, just to bring you abreast with what I'm saying, that very often when you give yourself a choice, and this is a conversation with yourself, as we were just discussing, that when something happens, you ask yourself, why should I do this, right? And then you list down. Now the default state at that point is negative. You're trying to prove to yourself why you should do it, whereas the why not, the default state is, yes, I'm going to do it. Now let me prove to myself, why should I not do it, right? And it's a nuanced difference. but it's a crucial nuance difference. And that's exactly what you're talking about, that which side of the seesaw are you starting from, the why not side or the why side? Because if you start from the why not side, the chances are you will be positive about doing it, because the negative is unlikely to overpower the positive. So that I mean, I really loved it when you brought it up, someone, last week, when we were talking about this, because it just changes the energy within you of what you can or cannot do, because
Absolutely.
you suddenly start feeling, what, I can do this, why not?
Yeah.
The positivity comes in strongly, which is brilliant.
No, this why and why not. I remember, one of the people I was coaching, very senior leader, and that was his realization in one of the coaching sessions. And that helped. That was so inspiring to me as well, to say, I mean, his whole thing was, I always ask why. Whenever something comes to me, I ask why. Now I'm going to say why not. I'm going to put that hat on, the why not hat,
Mm.
and then see where the answer is.
Yeah.
The answer could still be not to do something, but it's coming from the filter of why not.
So true.
Mm.
So I mean, that was to me like a wow. It was a wow moment for me too.
And it's a
Yeah.
great filter
I
to
think that's
use,
what coaching
especially
does.
when the kind of things we're talking about. The
Yes.
why not filter can be a far more useful filter than the why filter.
Yeah. And I think coaching helps a lot in these things. It's not those big gyan, cognitive items.
Yeah.
It's just those reframing of some of those
Yeah.
questions.
Which is why I find it so useful. I get coached as well, along with being a coach, and just that space to be, that non-judgmental space where to rap with myself, with somebody, yet picking up, challenging. It's such an interesting place for me personally. It helps me with some of these why and why not moments too. Life is too short here to keep asking why.